Go figure, as Joe Biden said when he announced to the American people that somebody called Rashid Sunak had been elected, not quite the right word, as the Prime Minister of Britain. I don't know what Joe would have said when the wafer-thin 52-48 result came through that the new Chief Minister, First Minister of Scotland is somebody called Humza Yousaf. And Humza Yousaf, a Pakistani, is now about to fight Rashid Sunak, an Indian, over whether to partition Britain. Well, it worked so well in the Indian subcontinent after all. Why not try it here in the mother country? Just as a matter of interest, the leader of the opposition in the Scottish Parliament is also a Pakistani, a Starmerite. Now, people are getting up ahead of Islamophobic steam about Humza Yousaf. They're very peculiar kinds of Muslims, these fellows. Humza Yousaf and the Labour leader, the leader of the opposition, Anas Sarwar. Very odd. They're both super woke. They both believe and voted for it and whipped their members to vote for it, that a man can become a woman just by declaring that he is. They both supported, until very recently, the idea that if someone did declare themselves a woman, if they were sentenced to prison, it must be on the women's prison estate. Both of them are LGBTQ+++ rainbow freaks. So the fact that they are nominally Muslim is actually the least of our problems in Scotland. The fact is that Humza Yousaf has been a failure in every single job that he's had, and he's had many. He has been drummed out of every one of them. He is a classic example of someone being promoted to the ranks of their last failure. Every failure has led to a promotion. And so much so that, having now just departed as the Health Secretary, he has appointed as his successor someone to be the Health and Recovery Secretary. That's how bad the Scottish Health Service is. Almost as bad as the Scottish Education Service. The Scottish Transport System, almost as bad, though you'd have to go some to be as bad, as Scotland's drugs death record. Where do you think the worst record of death from drugs in the world is? You think it's in Colombia? You think it's in Mexico City? You think it's in amongst the cartels in the Latin American jungles? No. The drugs death capital of the world is SNP-ruled Scotland. The children that are growing up in poverty have multiplied. Their number has multiplied over the 13 years of SNP rule. Of course, they like to blame everything on England. That's going to be a bit tricky when it's a Pakistani blaming an Indian for being English, but they'll have a go. The reality is that Scottish devolution has completely, abysmally failed. I was there. I was one of its pioneers, one of its advocates. It was intended as a means of giving Scottish people devolved government within the United Kingdom. It was never designed to withstand 13 years of political control by a party determined to use the platform and the resources given by the taxpayers in England to actually break up the country, all the while blaming the English people whose money they were using to keep the whole show on the road. We'll keep you posted on how that's going. I just make this point. It was a very narrow result. The last time there was a very narrow result in the EU referendum, funnily enough, by exactly the same numbers, 52 to 48. The SNP said that that margin of error was so slight that there had to be a second referendum. Watch out for someone going to court in Scotland to demand a recount and to demand a rerun of this most grotesque of contests that we have just endured. The French, of course, don't endure. They fight back. The fight back of the French people would be thrilling and encouraging people all over the so-called Western world if only they could see it, which is the reason why they cannot see it. It is the reason why television stations like RT are off the air in France as well as in Britain, indeed in many parts of the Western world, but not all. In the United States, for example, you can still see RT. How funny is that? But in Britain, you'd go to prison for even giving an interview to a reporter from RT. And now we know the real reason. The uprising in France, the revolution in France. This is a new French revolution. If they had had television cameras in 1789, this is what it would have looked like. Our own editor was actually gassed on the streets of a rural area in France. Just yesterday, he was gassed. He was only there to take a look on behalf of the mother of all talk shows. That's his pictures there. But he couldn't take that many because he got tear gas fired in his face, in his eyes. He was lucky that the canister went over his head, or he might have been gravely injured or worse. The French people are not deterred by this kind of thing. Neither are they likely to be deterred by the latest twist. Macron's thugs, otherwise known as police, have arrested a young woman for sending out a Twitter post that called the President of the Republic garbage. That's actually the least you could describe him as. This popinjay, petty prince who sits on his golden throne in Versailles like a latter-day Louis XVI, wearing his 80,000 euro watch and then having to slip it off mid-interview as someone was rapidly signaling to him from the wings that it wasn't a good look wearing a watch that expensive, whilst demanding that the French people should accept more and more austerity while sending billions and billions of their money to Zelensky in Ukraine. The French people are not putting up with it anymore. When it does get into the Western media, it's described as a protest about pensions. Like all these young people are on the streets of Paris every day and night about a pension they may or may not live to collect 40 or 45 years hence. It's not about pensions. It's about the whole package. It's about NATO. It's about Ukraine. It's about austerity, privatization, the policies of the rich, for the rich, by the rich, against the interests of the vast majority of the people of France. Mind you, it hasn't yet spread to the United States of America. There, it takes a morbid and I don't know how to put it delicately, a deadly identity politics hue, where a young woman goes into a school and murders 3 small children and 3 teachers in the school before being shot dead by the police. And the entire literati want to argue about whether she should be called a young woman or a young man, because she had declared she was no longer a she, but a he. Talk about 21st century problems. Talk about first world problems. This was the 129th mass shooting in America with automatic weapons since the beginning of the year, and it's only March. 129 mass shootings, killing little children as they hide under their desks in the schoolroom. Or it takes the morbid form of racial violence, of the murder of black people by United States law enforcement officials, otherwise known as the mob, otherwise known as organized crime, working for the capo in the White House, the head of the Biden crime family, Joseph Biden. You think I'm exaggerating? Did you see the news this very week that the Bidens received a sweetheart loan of $500,000 from a Ukrainian garagist, a Ukrainian second-hand car salesman, lent the family of the President of the United States $500,000 to secure the liens on their beachfront properties in Florida. You could not make this up. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's brother, God knows how many other Bidens have got their noses in the Ukrainian trough, in the Ukrainian nosebag, to such an extent, if they were lawyers, they'd have to recuse themselves from any further dealings with the Ukrainian file. I've only got time to turn to the funniest story of the week. Joe Biden is currently holding a democracy summit in southern Africa. That's right, in the very place where the United States and the United Kingdom and France and all the other so-called West supported racist, apartheid, white supremacist states right up until the very end. Margaret Thatcher, I was there, saw her lips move, called Nelson Mandela a common terrorist. The United States took Mandela off the terrorist list in 2008, in the 18th year of his presidency of the Republic of South Africa. And I got to thinking when I saw a very harrowing picture posted by one of my friends on Twitter earlier this evening. It's a picture that deserves to be seen far more widely. You'll find it on my Twitter feed. It's a picture of the Congo's first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, half naked, in shackles, being pushed down aircraft steps by a Belgian military officer after his overthrow in a coup organized and executed by Britain, Belgium, and the United States of America. The newly elected President Jack Kennedy knew nothing of this coup, and the CIA defied him, lied to him, and conducted this coup behind their new president's back. But it happened. The CIA, MI6, and the hated Belgian colonist government that was finally having to leave power took this fine man, probably the greatest of all African leaders, and murdered him. They then dismembered him. They then dissolved him in acid and sent one of his teeth back to Brussels for safekeeping, for DNA. It was only returned to the Congo last year. The West murdered Patrice Lumumba. The West helped keep Nelson Mandela in prison for 27 years, most of them on Devil's Island, Robben Island, in the dungeons of apartheid. The West supported racist apartheid rule in the very southern Africa they're now holding a summit in to tell Africans how important their democracy is. There's the picture of the hero Patrice Lumumba being led down the steps of that aircraft to his death, his dismemberment, and his dissolving in acid. You couldn't make it up. And they wonder why Africans are utterly unmoved at their pleas to reject China and Russia and embrace them instead. China never occupied a square inch of Africa. Russia never occupied a square inch of Africa. As a matter of fact, when the West was supporting apartheid and white supremacist rule in southern Africa, it was the Russians who were arming, financing, and providing the diplomatic skeleton, backbone for the worldwide activities of the anti-apartheid movement, of the movement for liberation in southern Africa. I have many times spoken at the Patrice Lumumba University for the Friendship of the Peoples. It's not in San Francisco, it's not in London, and it certainly isn't in Brussels. It's in Moscow. It's in Russia. I have been there, spoken there many times. Does that little vignette not explain something to you, the viewers, and the wider public about why the Africans will never hate Russia, will never hate China? China is building roads, railways, terminals, ports, harbors, infrastructure all over Africa. All the so-called West did was loot it and steal even the people of Africa themselves, chain them in the holds of ships, sailed them through the Middle Passage, tossing thousands of them overboard when they died as food for the sharks, and then those lucky enough to reach land were placed as beasts of burden in chains as slaves. You want Africans to support you, Mr. Biden, Mr. Sunak, Miss von der Leyen, Mr. Borrell, the people you just described as the people of the jungle while you sat in your garden. How does your garden grow now, Mr. Borrell? Have you seen the streets of France? We'll be talking about all of this over the course of the next hour and 14 minutes, because this is the mother of all talk shows.